The VP slid the paper across the table without blinking. One line in bold letters burned through the page. Accept the 58% pay cut, or we'll find someone who will. They knew I was a single dad. They knew my mortgage, my bills, my kid's school depended on that paycheck. And still, they pushed the paper toward me like it was a casual contract, as if gutting my entire life was just business. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't let them see the storm inside. I looked down at the paper, read it once, and said calmly, I need 24 hours. Then I slid it back across the table. That night, while my son slept in the room down the hall, I sat at the kitchen table with a single thought pressing through my mind. They thought they had me cornered. They thought desperation would make me weak. They were wrong. My name is Michael Harris, 45 years old, Senior Operations Director at Westbrook Industries. For 20 years, I built their systems, streamlined their logistics, trained their managers. I turned a company bleeding millions into one of the fastest-growing firms in the region. And this was my reward, a demand to cut my salary by more than half or be thrown aside. I didn't panic. I didn't beg. Instead, I opened my laptop and scrolled through my contacts. Buried among old emails was a name I hadn't touched in years. Richard Cole, CEO of Titan Global, Westbrook's biggest rival. The man who once tried to recruit me before Westbrook offered me loyalty, or what I thought was loyalty. At midnight, I made the call. My voice was steady, my words simple. Richard, it's Michael Harris. We need to talk. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask why I was calling so late. He just said, we've been waiting for this call. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the laptop lighting up the files I had been compiling for years. Every efficiency I had created, every system I had built, every contract I had secured, they weren't Westbrook's. They were mine. They lived in my head, and without me, the company was nothing but steel and paper. The VP thought a single piece of paper could corner me. He forgot that silence, patience, and timing are sharper than any signature. The next 24 hours weren't about survival. They were about positioning. Westbrook thought they could break me. What they didn't know was that I had already stepped out of their shadow. And by the time the sun rose again, they'd realized the mistake they'd made. Because I wasn't the man they could threaten. I was the man they couldn't replace. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. My son was still asleep, his backpack leaning against the wall where he always dropped it. I stood there for a moment, looking at it, reminding myself why I couldn't afford to break under pressure. Westbrook thought they could threaten me with numbers, with percentages, with ultimatums. They didn't understand that men like me don't fold. We calculate, we adapt, and then we move. I brewed coffee and opened my laptop again. The files I'd been gathering weren't accidents. For years, I had kept a personal archive. Performance reports, cost analyses, logistics models, every project I had built and delivered for Westbrook. I had them all, cleaned and stored in my own system. Not company property, not on their servers. Mine. Quiet insurance, in case the day ever came when loyalty turned into betrayal. That day had come. By 8 o'clock, I was on the phone with Richard Cole's office. His assistant didn't ask questions. She just said he'd clear his schedule. That told me everything. Titan Global had been waiting for this moment, watching Westbrook grow careless, waiting for their opening. I was that opening. At 9, my phone buzzed with a message from the VP. Just one line. Have you decided? I didn't reply. Not yet. Timing mattered. I wanted silence to do the work for me. Silence makes men like him nervous. Silence makes them wonder. I spent the rest of the morning pulling together a package for Titan. Not the raw files. That would be reckless. But a blueprint. A clear, methodical outline of what I had built at Westbrook, what I could replicate at Titan, and what I could dismantle if necessary. I wasn't threatening. I wasn't reckless. I was precise. By noon, Richard called me directly. His voice was calm, but sharp. He said Titan had been trying to outmaneuver Westbrook for years, but couldn't break their systems. I told him the truth, that the systems weren't Westbrook's. They were mine. And with me, Titan wouldn't just compete. They would dominate. Richard didn't hesitate. He said, we're prepared to make you whole. Salary, benefits, whatever it takes. Bring us what you know, and the rest will follow. I didn't commit. I told him I'd consider. Because leverage is strongest when it isn't spent too quickly. Then I hung up and leaned back in my chair. The VP thought he had forced me into a corner. What he didn't realize was that every step he pushed me, I was already mapping the exit. And not just an exit, an advance. That night, when my son sat across from me at dinner asking about homework, I nodded and helped him like always. On the surface, life looked unchanged. But beneath it, the ground was shifting. Quietly, strategically, in ways the VP couldn't see. He had given me 24 hours. I was going to use every single minute. By the afternoon of that same day, Westbrook was restless. I hadn't signed their paper, hadn't called, hadn't given them a single word. And silence was louder than anything I could have said. I could almost picture the VP pacing in his glass office, checking his phone, waiting for a message that wasn't coming. At 3 o'clock, another email arrived. This time it was longer, dressed up in corporate politeness. Michael, we value your contributions. We hope you'll make the practical choice for your family. If you sign today, we can expedite your new contract. The words were careful, but the desperation leaked through. They weren't in control anymore. I was. I didn't reply. Instead, I drafted my own message, but not to them. To Titan. I sent over the blueprint I'd assembled that morning. No sensitive files, no proprietary data, just a clean, sharp map of how I could rebuild their logistics to surpass Westbrook within 18 months. Within an hour, Richard's assistant confirmed a follow-up meeting for the next day. Titan wasn't wasting time. They knew exactly what was at stake. By 5 o'clock, the VP called my phone directly. His voice was clipped, forced calm. He said, Michael, this delay is making things complicated. We need your decision now. I let him finish, then replied with only 2 words, I'm thinking. And then I hung up. It was deliberate, calculated. Men like him thrived on control, on immediate obedience. By taking that away, by giving him nothing but silence, I was teaching him what pressure really felt like. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table while my son worked on his math homework beside me. He asked me how to solve an equation, and I walked him through it step by step. Numbers, logic, precision. It was the same approach I used at work, the same approach I was using now. Nothing emotional, nothing reckless, just sequence and structure. After he went to bed, I opened the safe I kept in the corner of my office. Inside were hard drives, neatly labeled, containing every report and model I designed over the years. I didn't plan to hand them over. Not yet. But knowing I had them gave me clarity. Proof of my work. Proof of my value. Proof that Westbrook had built its empire on my shoulders. At midnight, another call came from Richard. This time his tone was sharper, eager. He said, Michael, we're prepared to sign you immediately. Full package, no cuts. Name your terms. I told him I'd give him an answer within 24 hours. The VP thought he had set the clock ticking on me. What he didn't know was that I had already started a clock of my own, and his time was running out faster than mine ever could. By the next morning, the cracks in Westbrook's calm exterior were starting to show. I arrived at the office, as if nothing was unusual, and walked through the lobby. People looked at me differently. Curious, uncertain. Word had spread. They didn't know the details, but they knew something was happening. That silence was working again, seeping into the building, making everyone uneasy. The VP called me into his office within minutes. His tie was crooked, his face drawn tight. He gestured toward the chair across from him, but I didn't sit. He pushed the paper across the desk again, the same one I had seen the day before. Michael, he said, trying to keep his voice steady, we can't afford delays. You know what's at stake here. I looked at the paper once more, then slid it back without touching a pen. I said only 24 hours. His jaw clenched, but I didn't give him anything else. Silence again. Then I turned and walked out. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop, not to work on Westbrook's projects, but to refine the proposal for Titan. I added more detail, projections showing how their distribution network could overtake Westbrook's in less than 2 years. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't bluff. I showed them numbers, timelines, outcomes. Facts. Precision was my advantage. By noon, Richard's assistant confirmed a private meeting for the evening. Titan wasn't just interested, they were ready to move fast. That told me everything. Westbrook thought they held power over me, but Titan saw me as leverage against their rival. That kind of leverage, once recognized, can't be ignored. The VP sent another message in the afternoon. This one wasn't polished. Just a short, sharp line. If you walk away, it will follow you. A threat. I read it twice, then archived it. Empty words. Men who truly hold power don't waste time writing warnings. They don't need to. At home that night, I made dinner for my son. He laughed at something on television, and for a moment, The weight of the day slipped away. That laugh reminded me why I was doing this. Not for pride, not for revenge, but for security. They thought they could scare me with numbers. They forgot I had something stronger than fear. Purpose. After he went to bed, I drove across town to meet Richard at a quiet restaurant. He was already there, waiting. He didn't waste time. He leaned forward and said, "Michael, we can move tomorrow. Contracts drawn, terms met. But we need to know if you're in." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch across the table. He didn't press. He understood. The VP had tried to trap me with 24 hours. What he didn't see was that every hour made me stronger, not weaker. And by the time his deadline hit, he would be the one with no options left. By the morning of the deadline, Westbrook was no longer pretending. The VP's assistant was waiting at my desk before I even sat down. She said he needed to see me immediately. I followed her upstairs, past people who kept their eyes on their screens, pretending not to notice. Everyone knew something was about to break. When I stepped into his office, the VP looked worse than the day before. His sleeves were rolled up, his desk covered in folders. He didn't offer me a seat this time. He just shoved the paper forward and said, "Michael, we need an answer now. This company can't move forward until you sign." I picked up the paper, read the numbers again, and set it back down. Then I said nothing. Just silence. The kind that forces the other man to fill the void. He started talking faster, his voice tightening. He said the market was unstable, that sacrifices had to be made, that everyone was taking cuts. But I knew the truth. Not everyone was asked to bleed 58%. Only me. Only the single dad who they thought wouldn't risk it. I let him run out of words before I finally said, "You'll have it when the day ends." Then I turned and walked out. His voice followed me down the hall, sharp, cracking. He wasn't calm anymore. He was panicking. Back at my desk, I opened my email. Titan's legal team had sent over a draft contract. The terms were clear: full salary, bonuses, relocation assistance if I wanted it, and a signing package worth more than what Westbrook had cut. They weren't negotiating, they were investing. They knew what I brought to the table, and they weren't about to let Westbrook keep it. By lunchtime, the VP sent me another message. Shorter this time. Just 4 words: "Don't make a mistake." I stared at it, then closed the screen. If he thought fear would change me, he hadn't been paying attention. Fear had been burned out of me years ago. That afternoon, Richard called again. His voice was steady, confident. He said Titan had already cleared the budget for my arrival. They weren't just waiting, they were ready. "When Westbrook loses you," he said, "they'll lose everything you built. And we'll be standing there to take it." I didn't answer him directly. I just told him, "I'll be in touch tonight." At 5 o'clock sharp, I gathered my things and walked past the VP's office. His door was open, but I didn't stop. I saw him glance up, eyes red, jaw tight. He looked at me like a man watching his grip slip from the edge of a cliff. He thought he could corner me with numbers on paper. But he had forgotten one truth. Silence doesn't corner, it surrounds. And as the deadline closed in, he was the one running out of air, not me. The final hours of the deadline passed like a countdown only the VP could hear. I walked through the building calm, collected, while he paced upstairs, calling, sending messages, trying to force a response. Every time my phone buzzed, I ignored it. Silence was the answer. At 4 o'clock, his assistant appeared again at my desk. Her voice was tight, her eyes avoiding mine. She said, "He needs your decision before 5. I nodded once and went back to typing. That single gesture rattled her more than words ever could. When the clock struck 5, I didn't go to his office. I didn't sign his paper. Instead, I went home. My son was waiting with his backpack, asking if I could help him finish a school project. I sat down at the table and worked through it with him, step by step, the same way I'd been building my next move. Quiet, precise, methodical. At 7, when the house was quiet again, I picked up my phone and called Richard. His voice came through immediately, strong and expectant. "Michael," he said, "are we ready?" I told him yes. That was all. Just one word. And with it, the balance shifted. Richard didn't waste a second. He said his legal team would finalize the contract overnight. He said Titan would make an announcement within days. He said they'd been waiting for this moment for years, and now it had finally come. After I hung up, I checked my inbox one last time. The VP had sent 6 messages in the past hour, each one more frantic than the last. The final one wasn't even polished. It just said, "Don't do this. We need you." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence had already said everything. The next morning, the news hit the wires. Titan had hired me as executive director of operations. The package was public. Full salary. Bonus. No cuts. Analysts called it a major blow to Westbrook, a move that would shift the balance of the industry. I walked into Westbrook's office for the last time that day. People stopped and stared as I headed upstairs. The VP was waiting, his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off with one line. Your paper is still unsigned. Then I set my badge on his desk, turned, and walked out. No shouting, no threats, no explanation, just silence. By the time I reached the street, my phone was buzzing again, not with Westbrook's messages, but with congratulations from Titan. The VP's deadline had passed, but it wasn't my time that ran out. It was his. My first week at Titan didn't feel like starting somewhere new. It felt like stepping into a role I had already prepared for years. Their systems were solid but underdeveloped. Their logistics were efficient but limited. They had the framework, but not the engine. I was the engine. Richard met me personally on my first day. His handshake was firm, his words direct. Michael, we brought you here to win. Nothing less. That clarity mattered. At Westbrook, I was told to make it work, while executives collected bonuses off my labor. At Titan, the mission was simple: outpace, outmaneuver, and dismantle the competition. I built my new team quickly. Analysts, engineers, coordinators, they weren't the problem. They just needed someone to give them direction. And I gave it with precision. No shouting, no long speeches. Just clear instructions, executed step by step. They adapted faster than I expected. Within weeks, numbers were rising. Meanwhile, Westbrook was stumbling. The industry press was ruthless. Headlines spoke of instability, leadership missteps, and a brain drain at the executive level. None of the articles mentioned my name directly, but the message was obvious. Everyone in the business world knew what had happened. They had forced out the man holding their systems together, and Titan had been waiting with open arms. The VP tried to spin it publicly. He gave an interview claiming Westbrook was streamlining operations and positioning for growth. But his words fell flat. Suppliers whispered about delays. Clients complained about missed deliveries. Their silence with Westbrook was louder than his words to the press. At home, life grew steadier. My son noticed it first. He said I seemed calmer, less tired, more present. He didn't know the details, and I didn't tell him. But he could see the difference. Westbrook had drained me for years. Titan gave me room to breathe. Still, I didn't forget the VP. I kept the memory of that paper sliding across his desk sharp in my mind. 58%. That was the number they thought my life was worth. Every time Titan hit a milestone, every time a shipment left on time, every time I saw our charts rise while Westbrook's fell, I thought of that number. And I thought of his face when I laid my badge on his desk and walked away. By the end of my second month, Titan had already secured 2 contracts Westbrook had been fighting to keep. Richard called it a victory. I called it the beginning. Westbrook had underestimated me. Titan had given me the platform. And now the silence that once protected me had turned into something else, momentum. The VP believed he could corner me with a piece of paper. Instead, he had written the opening line of his own downfall. By the 3rd month, Titan's growth wasn't just noticeable, it was undeniable. Contracts that once felt locked to Westbrook started moving our way. Suppliers called me directly, saying they trusted Titan's timelines more. Clients who had been burned by Westbrook's delays were ready to switch. I didn't need to persuade them with long speeches. Numbers spoke. Silence followed, the kind that settled in when results couldn't be denied. Richard kept his distance, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes during quarterly reviews. He didn't micromanage. He didn't need to. He had given me the space to work, and I was delivering. Meanwhile, Westbrook was unraveling in real time. Articles hit the industry press every week. Operational shortfalls plague Westbrook. Leadership turmoil continues. Key accounts depart for Titan. Each headline cut deeper. Each one traced back to the moment the VP slid that paper across the desk, thinking he held power. The whispers reached me too. Former colleagues sent quiet messages late at night. Some congratulated me. Some begged for opportunities at Titan. A few admitted they hadn't understood my silence back then, but now they did. Silence had done more damage than shouting ever could. The VP tried to steady his ship, but desperation has a smell, and the market caught it. One supplier told me he demanded concessions Westbrook couldn't afford. Another said he blamed middle managers for mistakes he had made himself. The picture was clear: a man drowning, pulling everyone else down with him. At home, I saw the difference in smaller ways. My son no longer asked if I'd be late for dinner. He knew I'd be there. Melissa, my sister, who often helped with him when I was buried in work, said I seemed like a different man. She wasn't wrong. Westbrook had been a weight I carried in silence. Titan was momentum I directed with precision. Still, I didn't gloat. I didn't post, didn't brag, didn't send messages. That wasn't my style. Silence was my tool, and I kept it sharp. But when I read a piece about Westbrook losing their largest contract, a contract I had personally secured years ago, I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing exactly how it happened. By the end of that quarter, Titan's charts soared. Westbrook's plummeted. Investors shifted. Analysts called it a market correction. I called it inevitability. The VP thought cutting me down would save his budget. Instead, it cut the legs out from under his entire company. Every loss they suffered traced back to one decision, one paper, one threat delivered across his desk, and the silence I gave him in return. By the 6th month, Westbrook was no longer a competitor. It was a cautionary tale. Investors pulled their money, clients fled, and suppliers stopped taking their calls. The headlines grew harsher. Westbrook on the brink. Leadership under fire. Collapse imminent. I didn't need to read between the lines to know who they were pointing at. One morning, a former colleague sent me a photo. It was the VP, walking out of the building with a cardboard box in his hands. His tie was loose, his shoulders slumped, his face hollow. The caption under the article was simple: executive termination amid ongoing crisis. I stared at that photo longer than I expected. This was the same man who had slid a paper across the desk, certain he held all the leverage. The man who thought cutting me down by 58% would make me beg. Now he was walking out the door, stripped of his title, his influence, his illusion of control. I didn't feel triumph. Not really. What I felt was confirmation. He had written his own, ending the moment. He underestimated me. I had just let the silence carry it to him. At Titan, our progress was accelerating. Contracts that once seemed impossible were now ours. Analysts praised the turnaround. Rivals started imitating our methods, but they were always steps behind. Every system I built at Westbrook, I had rebuilt stronger here, with resources they never gave me. Richard called me into his office that month. He said, "Michael, you've done in half a year what most men couldn't in 3. This isn't just growth, it's dominance." His words were measured, but I could hear the respect underneath. Titan wasn't just keeping me, they were building around me. At home, life was quieter. My son had stopped asking questions about money. He didn't need to. The stability spoke for itself. He saw me at the dinner table every night, calm, present, not weighed down by the endless grind of keeping a sinking ship afloat. The VP, meanwhile, disappeared from the industry. No one hired him. No one wanted his name tied to their company. In an industry that remembers everything, his reputation was a scar that wouldn't heal. Sometimes I thought back to that moment in his office. The way he leaned forward, certain of his power, certain I had no choice. He didn't realize then that silence is a choice. A powerful one. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I didn't try to prove my worth. I just let him talk while I planned my move. And when the time came, I didn't raise my voice. I just walked out. That silence stayed with him. It followed him to the moment he carried that cardboard box out of the building. And it will follow him for the rest of his career, or whatever is left of it. A year after I walked away from Westbrook, I stood in Titan's headquarters overlooking the city skyline. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected a version of myself I barely recognized. Calm, steady, in control. My team was thriving, the company was breaking records, and the industry had shifted in our favor. What once felt like survival had become strategy, executed step by step in silence. Westbrook no longer existed in the same way. Their name was still on the building, but the inside was hollow. Clients had moved on, contracts dissolved, investors gone. The papers called it a collapse driven by mismanagement. I knew the truth. It wasn't mismanagement alone, it was arrogance. They thought they could break me, reduce me to numbers, cut me down until I accepted less. They forgot that silence is not surrender. Silence is preparation. The VP never resurfaced. Occasionally, his name appeared in small notes online, consulting for minor firms, giving talks that no one attended. The man who once thought he could dictate my worth had been erased from the industry. His voice had vanished. Mine had never needed to be raised. At home, life settled into something simpler. My son grew taller, sharper, more confident. He didn't know the details of how close we had come to losing everything, but he felt the difference. He saw me home on time, not buried in stress, not carrying invisible weight. He saw a man who didn't fold when cornered. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit at the table where it all began. The memory of that paper sliding across the desk was still sharp. 58%. That was the number they put on me, the value they thought represented my life, my work, my future. That number had become a line in the sand. On one side, everything I built for them. On the other, everything I would take with me. I never raised my voice. I never begged. I never fought on their terms. I let them underestimate me, let them think they had control. And when the time came, I gave them nothing but silence. That silence did more damage than shouting ever could. Looking back now, I realize it wasn't just about winning. It was about teaching them, and myself, what power really is. Power isn't in the threats you make or the papers you push across the table. Power is in knowing when not to speak, when to wait, when to let the silence do the work. The VP thought silence meant weakness. What he never understood was that silence was the weapon. And by the time he realized it, his story was already over. Mine had only just begun. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.